Julian Vance lived his life within the pristine confines of glass and steel, a monarch in a kingdom of his own making. From his penthouse office on the 92nd floor, the city below was a schematic, a collection of assets and liabilities, not a home to millions of beating hearts. He moved through the world with a chilling precision, his days dictated by market fluctuations and acquisition strategies. His heart, if he still possessed one, was a silent partner in the multi-billion-dollar enterprise of his existence, offering no opinions and making no demands. Today, like any other day, was about conquest. He had just concluded a conference call that saw a rival company crumble, its assets absorbed into the monolithic Vance holdings with the dispassionate efficiency of a black hole. He felt nothing, not triumph, not satisfaction, just the quiet hum of a machine functioning as designed. He loosened the knot of his silk tie, the fabric a soft gray that matched the perpetual clouds in his eyes. His reflection stared back from the floor-to-ceiling window, a man perfectly tailored, impeccably groomed, and utterly vacant. The silence of the office was broken by the soft click of heels against marble. Beatrice Sinclair, his fiancée, entered without knocking. She was as polished and flawless as the space she occupied, her beauty a statement of wealth and breeding. She was the other half of a merger, not of hearts but of dynasties. "The call went well, I assume," she said, her voice smooth and cool. She didn't ask it like a question. She stated it as a fact. Failure was not a concept that orbited Julian Vance, and by extension, her. She placed a heavy, embossed invitation on his desk. "Do not forget the land auction tonight, the Willow Creek parcel. It is imperative we are seen there. Good for the brand, especially after this morning's restructuring." Julian glanced at the invitation, his lip curling slightly. A charity auction, a performance of philanthropy he had no time for. The parcel of land was a small, insignificant plot bordering a future Vance development site. Acquiring it was a footnote, a matter of public relations. "I have more pressing matters than bidding on dirt, Beatrice. Our image is the most pressing matter of all," she countered, her tone unwavering. "My father will be there. Your presence is not a request." Her smile was perfect and held no warmth. It was a tool like everything else in their world. He nodded curtly, dismissing her. The auction was a chore, another box to be checked on the long, sterile list of his duties. Hours later, Julian stood in the back of a crowded, overwarm ballroom. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low murmur of self-congratulation. Millionaires and socialites mingled, their laughter brittle. He felt a familiar sense of detachment, an invisible barrier separating him from the rest of humanity. He was here to buy a piece of forgotten farmland named Willow Creek, a task his assistant could have handled, but one that required the personal touch of the king himself. He nursed a glass of scotch, waiting for the tedious affair to conclude. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and a plastic smile, finally introduced Lot 7. The quaint and storied Willow Creek farm, a picture of a rustic, slightly dilapidated farmhouse and overgrown fields flashed on the screen behind him. A murmur went through the crowd. It was a charity case, a donation to the Land Conservancy Trust after the previous owner's death. The bidding started low, a few token offers from people looking for a tax write-off. Julian prepared to deliver the final, crushing bid that would end the charade. But then, a clear, determined voice cut through the noise. 20,000. Every head turned. Standing near the front was a young woman who was so starkly out of place she might as well have been from another planet. Her dress was simple, her hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her hands, though clean, looked like they were no strangers to hard work. There was a fire in her eyes, a desperate intensity that did not belong in this room of casual extravagance. Julian felt a flicker of annoyance. He signaled his own bid, a dismissive 50,000. The auctioneer's eyes lit up, but the woman didn't back down. 60,000, she said, her voice trembling slightly but unbroken. Beside her, half hidden behind her skirt, were two small children, a boy and a girl, twins by the look of them, their faces pale and serious. They clung to her hands, their wide eyes fixed on the stage. Julian's gaze drifted to the boy, and for a reason he could not fathom, the world tilted on its axis. The boy's eyes, they were a peculiar, arresting shade of gray-blue, flecked with silver. They were the color of a stormy sea, the color of a winter sky. They were Julian Vance's eyes. He saw them every single morning in the mirror, a genetic inheritance from his mother. A jolt, electric and terrifying, shot through him. It was impossible. Coincidence. It had to be. He tried to shake it off, his logical mind rebelling against the sudden, visceral pull. He motioned to his aide. "Finish this," he commanded, his voice hoarse. The aide raised the paddle. $200,000. A collective gasp filled the room. That was 10 times the land's value. It was a power move, a statement of utter dominance meant to obliterate any further challenge. The auctioneer looked at the woman, his expression a mixture of pity and excitement. "Mom." The woman, Elara Hayes as he would later learn her name was, took a shaky breath. She looked down at the children, whispering something to them. Then, looking back at the auctioneer, her face a mask of desperate resolve, she said, $205,000. The money was clearly beyond her. The bid an act of pure, irrational faith. Julian, watching her, felt an unfamiliar emotion stir in his chest. It was not anger. It was a strange, unwelcome pang of something. Beatrice, who had materialized at his side, scoffed quietly. How pathetic. Let her have her patch of weeds. The press will have a field day with the story of the benevolent millionaires letting the poor farmer's daughter win. But Julian was no longer listening. He was watching the woman, this Elara, as the auctioneer, stunned by the silence, brought the gavel down. Sold. To the young lady at the front. A smattering of polite, confused applause broke out. Elara Hayes sagged with relief, tears streaming down her face as she knelt to hug the two children. A local reporter, sensing a human interest story, rushed over with a microphone. "Miss, that was incredible. You outbid some of the city's wealthiest people. You must have wanted this land very badly. Can you tell us why?" Elara stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, her chin held high. She pulled the twins closer, her arms a protective shield around them. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and carried through the silent ballroom. "This land, it was my best friend's home. It holds a promise I made to her before she passed away. A promise to keep it safe for her children." She looked down at the boy and girl. It belonged to their mother. Lila. The name struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a name. It was an echo from a buried lifetime. A summer 7 years ago. A whirlwind romance with a woman who laughed with her whole body and painted sunlight onto canvas. A woman full of life and fire. A woman his father and Beatrice had deemed unsuitable for Vance. A woman he had been forced to discard like a failed business venture. He stared at the children, really seeing them now. The boy with his eyes. The girl with a faint dimple in her chin, just like Lila's. The math was not complicated. 7 years. Promise. Her children. The scotch glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the polished floor. But he didn't hear it. The entire opulent room, the city outside, his entire life had just been rendered meaningless. He turned and walked out, stumbling like a drunk, leaving Beatrice calling his name in the wreckage of his past. The world he had meticulously built had just been demolished by a single whispered name. Back in the sterile silence of his penthouse, the city lights below seemed to mock him. They were cold, distant, and meaningless, just like the life he had so carefully constructed. He bypassed the liquor cabinet, his usual refuge, and went instead to a sleek, minimalist credenza in his private study. He ran his hand over the smooth, unmarked surface before pressing a hidden release. A drawer slid open, revealing a compartment he had not accessed in years. Inside was a small, unassuming wooden box. His hands, usually so steady during multi-billion-dollar negotiations, trembled as he lifted the lid. The scent of dried lavender and old paper filled the air. Inside were photographs, letters, mementos from a life he had tried to surgically remove from his memory. There he was, younger, happier, his arm wrapped around a woman with sun-streaked hair and a smile that could eclipse the sun. Lila. Every photo was a testament to a joy so profound it felt like a betrayal to the man he had become. He remembered their last conversation. It had been a fight, brutal and final. He had stood in this very room, parroting the words his father and Beatrice had fed him. That she was a distraction, that she didn't fit into his world, that their future was an impossibility. He had been a coward, a puppet dancing on the strings of legacy and expectation. He had broken her heart, and in doing so had carved out his own, leaving a void he had spent the next 7 years filling with money and power. His fingers brushed against a stack of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon. Her letters. He had read them all except one. The last one. It had arrived a week after he had ended things. Beatrice had intercepted it, handing it to him with a dismissive wave of her hand. "More desperate rambling," she had said. "It is better to make a clean break, Julian. For her sake as much as yours," believing her, wanting to believe her. He had tossed it into the box, unopened. Now, it felt like a holy relic, a sacred text holding the answers to a question that was tearing him apart. With fumbling fingers, he untied the ribbon and found the envelope. Her familiar, artistic script flowed across the front. His name. He slid his finger under the seal, his heart hammering against his ribs. The paper inside was thin, tear-stained in places. "My dearest Julian," it began. "I know you said not to write, but I cannot honor that. Not with this. My love, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby. I know the timing is terrible. I know what your family thinks of me. But this changes everything. This is a part of us, a part of our love. I am going home, back to Willow Creek Farm. It is safe there. It is where I want to raise our child. Please, Julian, do not let them decide for you. Come and find us. I will wait for you. I love you always. Lila." The letter, dated almost exactly 7 years ago, slipped from his grasp. Pregnant. A baby. Our child. The words were not just ink on paper. They were ghosts that rose from the page to accuse him. He had not just abandoned the woman he loved. He had abandoned his own child. The air in the room grew thin, crushing his lungs. He was suffocating under the weight of a sin he had not even known he had committed. The click of the elevator door announced Beatrice's arrival. She swept into the study, her expression one of controlled fury. "What was that, Julian? You humiliated me. You humiliated us." Stumbling out of a public event like a common drunk. Then her eyes fell on the open box, on the letter lying on the floor. Her face hardened, the mask of civility falling away to reveal the cold, hard steel beneath. "You cannot be serious," she hissed, her voice dripping with disdain. "You are still pining for that girl?" "Julian, listen to me. She was a footnote, a youthful indiscretion. Our merger, our families, the future we are building, that is what is real. My father and yours did what was necessary to protect you from a mistake that could have ruined your entire life." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a partner, but a gatekeeper to his prison. Her talk of protection and legacy was nothing more than a euphemism for control and cruelty. "A mistake," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "She was carrying my child, Beatrice." For the first time, a flicker of something. Was it panic? Crossed her features, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. They were rumors. Desperate lies from a desperate girl trying to trap you. "You did the right thing." "We did the right thing," she knelt, making to pick up the letter, but he was faster, snatching it away from her grasp. He stood up, towering over her, the immense guilt inside him transmuting into a cold, diamond-hard rage. "Get out," he said. "Julian, do not be ridiculous." "I said, get out." He turned his back on her, walking to the window that overlooked his silent, empty kingdom. He needed answers. Not Beatrice's sanitized version of the truth, but the real, ugly, painful truth. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he kept for emergencies. It was answered on the first ring. "Marcus," he said, his voice strained. "I have a job for you. It requires absolute discretion and immediate attention." Marcus Thorne was more than Julian's head of security. He was a ghost, a man who could navigate the shadows of the world to find any truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. He had been a federal agent before Vance's money had bought his loyalty. "Name it." Marcus's voice came through, calm and professional. "A woman named Elara Hayes," Julian said, staring at his own reflection, at the haunted gray eyes staring back. "She just bought a piece of land called Willow Creek Farm. She has 2 children with her. Twins. A boy and a girl around 7 years old. I need to know everything about them. And I need to know about their mother. Her name was Lila. Lila, I do not know her last name. She lived on that farm 7 years ago. I need to know how she died." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Understood," Marcus said. "I will get back to you as soon as I have something." The line went dead. Julian stood there for a long time, the letter clutched in his hand, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear of color through the tears he refused to let fall. The call from Marcus came less than 3 hours later. Julian had not moved. He sat in the dark, the box of memories open on the desk before him like a tomb. "I have the preliminary information," Marcus said, his voice stripped of its usual professional detachment. There was a grimness to it that set Julian's teeth on edge. Lila's last name was Ashton. Lila Ashton. She died 5 years ago. A car accident on a rural road not far from the farm. Julian closed his eyes, a fresh wave of pain washing over him. "An accident," he repeated numbly. "That is the official report," Marcus continued, his tone sharpening. "Single vehicle. Brake failure. Her truck went off a small bridge into a ravine. But I have an old contact in the state patrol, someone who owes me a favor. He was a rookie on the scene that night. He said he always felt something was off. The brake lines looked clean. Almost too clean for a catastrophic failure on an old farm truck. It looked more like they were cut." Julian's blood ran cold. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I am saying it might not have been an accident," Marcus said bluntly. "As for Elara Hayes, she was Lila Ashton's childhood best friend. Grew up on the neighboring farm. When Lila died, there was no next of kin listed. Elara Hayes petitioned the court for guardianship of the twins, Leo and Lily. She was granted full custody. From what I can gather, she sold her own family's land and has been working multiple jobs ever since just to keep Willow Creek from being repossessed. She has sacrificed everything for those kids, Julian. Everything. Sacrificed everything." The words echoed in the cavernous emptiness of the penthouse. While Julian was building an empire of glass and steel, a woman he had never met was sacrificing everything to raise his children. Children he never knew existed. And their mother, the only woman he had ever truly loved, might have been murdered. The structure of his world did not just have cracks in it anymore. It had been leveled to the ground, and he was standing alone in the rubble. The next morning, Julian did something he had not done in over a decade. He drove himself. He left his chauffeur, his security detail, and his entire life of curated comfort behind. He piloted his sleek, black supercar out of the city, the engine a low growl of power that felt obscene as the concrete jungle gave way to green fields and rolling hills. He followed the directions on his navigation system until the paved roads turned to gravel. He was entering another world, a world he had once briefly touched and then callously discarded. Willow Creek Farm looked just like the photograph from the auction, only more real, more worn. The white paint on the farmhouse was peeling, the porch swing hung from a single chain, and the fences sagged like tired old men. Yet, there was a stubborn beauty to it all. Wildflowers grew in defiant patches along the driveway, and the air smelled of damp earth and hay, a scent so pure it felt like an accusation against the sterile, recycled air of his penthouse. He saw her near the barn, wrestling with a broken section of fence. Elara Hayes. She was wearing patched jeans and a faded t-shirt, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was trying to stretch a new roll of wire, her muscles straining, her frustration palpable. The twins, Leo and Lily were nearby, collecting rocks by the creek bed, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It was a portrait of struggle and resilience, and it hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. He parked the car out of sight behind a copse of trees and got out. For a moment he was paralyzed. What could he possibly say? "Hello, I am the man who broke your best friend's heart and abandoned her and my children, and I would like to insert myself into your lives now?" The absurdity, the sheer arrogance of it was overwhelming. So he chose not to be Julian Vance, CEO. He stripped off his $1,000 jacket, rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, and approached her not as a king, but as a man. "Looks like you could use a hand with that," he said, his voice sounding rough and unfamiliar in the open air. Alara jumped, startled. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. She took in his expensive clothes, his out-of-place appearance. "I am fine," she said curtly, turning back to the fence. "Who are you?" "A neighbor," he lied, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "Well, sort of. My company is developing some property down the road. I was just looking over the area," he gestured vaguely. "My name is Jay." It was a nickname Lila had used for him, a name from another life. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze sharp and intelligent. He could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, but also an unyielding strength. "You do not look like you have ever stretched a fence in your life," she said, a hint of wry amusement in her voice. "You would be right," he admitted with a small, self-deprecating smile. "But I am a fast learner. Please, let me help." Hesitantly, she nodded. "Fine. Grab the post. We need to pull it taut before I can staple the wire." He did as he was told, his hands, more accustomed to signing contracts than gripping weathered wood, protesting. The work was hard, physical, and real. For the next hour, they worked in a tense silence, punctuated only by Alara's brief, direct instructions. He felt clumsy and useless, but he persisted, driven by a desperate need to do something, anything, to atone for the years of neglect. He spent the entire day on the farm. He helped Alara fix the fence, clear a fallen branch from the roof of the shed, and haul feed for the few chickens they kept. He saw firsthand the depth of their hardship. He saw the worn-out soles of the children's shoes, the carefully patched elbows on Leo's sweater. He watched as Alara divided a single apple between the three of them for a snack, saving the smallest piece for herself. Each detail was a fresh stab of guilt, a stark, brutal contrast to his life of thoughtless excess, where he would spend more on a single lunch than she probably saw in a month. The children, at first wary of the stranger, slowly began to warm to him. Lily remained shy, observing him from a distance with her mother's soulful eyes. But Leo, bold and curious, was a different story. He approached Julian while he was taking a water break, his small hands clutching something. "What are you doing here?" Leo asked, his voice clear and direct, his gray-blue eyes, Julian's eyes, staring right through him. "Just helping Alara out," Julian managed to say, his throat tight. Leo seemed to consider this. He then opened his hand, revealing a small bird, intricately carved from a single piece of wood. It was weathered and smooth with age. "Mommy Lila made this," he said. "Alara says she was a great artist." Julian's breath caught. He reached out and gently took the bird. He knew it instantly, the specific way the wing was angled, the tiny notch on the beak. He had carved an identical one for Lila on their second date, using a pocket knife and a fallen branch from a willow tree by this very creek. She had loved it, calling it their little secret. He had made it for her, and she, in turn, had copied it for their son. The continuity of this small, simple object felt more significant than any legacy of buildings or billions he could ever hope to create. "It is beautiful," Julian whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. He handed it back to the boy, their fingers brushing. It was a fleeting touch, but it felt like the first real thing he had experienced in 7 years. He was connecting not just with his son, but with a ghost, with a promise he never knew he was supposed to keep. Later in the afternoon, they were working near the creek, clearing away some overgrown brush. Lily, who had been quietly watching Julian all day, finally approached him. She tugged on the sleeve of his now filthy shirt. He turned, and she looked up at him, her expression unervingly serious for a child her age. She tilted her head, her gaze intense. "Your eyes," she said, her voice a soft whisper that carried with devastating clarity. "They are just like Leo's." Julian froze, every muscle in his body locking up. He could feel Alara's gaze on him, sharp and sudden. He tried to form a response, a denial, anything, but his mind was blank. Lily was not finished. She reached out a small finger and gently touched the corner of his mouth. "And you have the sad smile," she added quietly. "Like the man in Mommy Lila's pictures. The ones she kept in her special box." The world stopped. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the gurgle of the creek. It all faded into a deafening silence. Alara dropped the hoe she was holding. It landed with a dull thud in the soft earth. She stared at him, her face paling, her eyes widening with a dawning, horrified recognition. Every friendly gesture, every lie he had told, replayed in her mind, now cast in a sinister new light. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice low and trembling with a rage that was far more terrifying than any shout. "Who are you really?" The lie was over. His carefully constructed alias of Jay had crumbled to dust under the innocent, observant gaze of his own daughter. He was Julian Vance, and he had come to the one place on earth he had no right to be. Beatrice was not a woman to be trifled with, nor was she one to be left in the dark. Julian's abrupt departure from the auction, followed by his uncharacteristically emotional state and his sudden, unexplained absence, were anomalies she could not tolerate. Her world, like Julian's, was built on control. Using the vast resources of her father's company, she had Julian followed. The report that came back was worse than she could have imagined. Julian Vance, CEO of a global empire, was spending his day playing farmhand at Willow Creek. Her fury was cold and precise. This was not about a past sentiment. It was a present threat. This woman, this Alara Hayes, and her 2 children were a complication that could unravel everything. The merger, her social standing, the entire future she had meticulously planned. She acted with swift, surgical cruelty. The next morning, a sleazy online tabloid published a front-page story. The headline screamed, "Gold Digger Uses Tragic Orphans in Plot to Snare Billionaire Heir." The article, filled with anonymous sources, painted Alara as a manipulative schemer, using her dead friend's children to extort Julian Vance, preying on a youthful fling from his past. But Beatrice did not stop there. She made an anonymous call to Child Protective Services, her voice dripping with fabricated concern. She spoke of neglect, of an unstable environment, of 2 small children living in squalor on a dilapidated farm with a guardian who had just spent a suspicious, life-altering sum of money she could not possibly have. An investigation was launched immediately. A social worker was dispatched to Willow Creek. Beatrice was not just trying to scare Alara. She was trying to erase her. Meanwhile, Julian was reeling from his own discovery. The confirmation from Marcus had landed like a bomb. "I have something more on Lila Ashton's accident," Marcus had said over a secure line, his voice grim. "The State Patrol rookie I spoke to? He pulled the original incident report for me. There was a witness, a local farmer who thought he saw a dark sedan speeding away from the area moments after the crash. He reported it, but the detail was dismissed, buried in the supplemental notes." "Oh, see them?" Julian asked, his mind racing. "Yes," Marcus confirmed, "and I dug into the financials of the mechanic who signed off on the faulty brakes report. He came into a significant sum of money a week after the accident. A cash deposit of $50,000. I followed the money trail. It's convoluted, laundered through a series of shell corporations." "Get to the point, Marcus," Julian snapped, his patience gone. "The final shell corporation, the one that sourced the funds," Marcus said, pausing for effect, "is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sinclair Enterprises." Sinclair Enterprises, Beatrice's family company. The implication was monstrous, unthinkable. It suggested that the campaign to separate him from Lila had not ended with a forced breakup. It had ended with murder. The thought was so vile, so far beyond the pale of civilized behavior, that Julian felt a wave of nausea. He had been engaged to a monster. He had to tell Alara. He drove back to the farm, the tabloid story already burning a hole in his phone screen, the social worker's impending visit a ticking clock. He found Alara on the porch, her face pale, her body rigid with fury and fear. She was holding a printed copy of the article. She looked up as he approached, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "Is this you?" she spat, thrusting the paper at him. "Is this your idea of helping? Sending your lawyers and your gossip rags to destroy me?" "No," Julian said, his voice raw with sincerity. "Alara, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with this. This is Beatrice, my fiancée, or my ex-fiancée." He took a deep breath, the confession catching in his throat. "I need to tell you everything." He stood on that sagging porch and laid his life bare. He told her about Lila, about their love, and about his own cowardice in the face of his family's pressure. He told her about the unopened letter, about his 7 years of ignorance. And then, his voice dropping, he told her what Marcus had discovered about the accident, about the cut-break lines, about the money trail that led directly to Beatrice's family. Alara listened, her expression shifting from pure rage to confusion, and then to a dawning, shared horror. The story was so monstrous, so far beyond what she could have imagined. Yet it fit. It explained the subtle, unsettling things Lila had mentioned in her final weeks, the feeling of being watched, the strange car she sometimes saw parked down the road. At the time, Alara had dismissed it as the anxieties of a young, single mother-to-be. Now, it sounded like the prelude to her murder. Her anger toward Julian did not vanish, but it was overshadowed by the looming threat of the woman who had orchestrated all of this. She saw the genuine anguish in his eyes, the guilt that was tearing him apart. He was not the enemy. He was another victim of Beatrice's ruthless ambition. An unwilling one, perhaps, but a victim nonetheless. "Lila kept journals," Alara said quietly, her voice hoarse. "She wrote in them every day. After she died, I packed them away. I could not bear to read them, but she mentioned being afraid. She wrote about someone following her, a silent understanding passed between them. They were no longer adversaries. They were allies, bound by a shared love for Lila and a common, dangerous enemy." She went inside and returned with a stack of worn, leather-bound notebooks. They were a weapon, and she was handing it to him. Their fragile alliance was tested almost immediately. A pristine government car pulled into the driveway. A woman in a severe suit stepped out, holding a clipboard. The social worker had arrived, summoned by Beatrice's poison. Just as Julian was preparing to intervene, a sleek, dark car pulled in behind the social workers. The door opened and Beatrice Sinclair stepped out, a portrait of cool, calculated concern. She had not come to watch from the sidelines. She had come to direct the show. "Julian, darling," she said, ignoring Alara completely. "I came as soon as I heard. I saw that dreadful article, and then I heard from my father that social services had been alerted. I was so worried about the children." Her eyes, cold and reptilian, swept over the farm with unconcealed disgust. "This is no place to raise children. It is squalid." She turned to the social worker, her voice dropping into a tone of grave authority. "I am Beatrice Sinclair, Mr. Vance's fiancée. We are prepared to offer these children a stable, secure home. We have already initiated a legal proceeding to have their guardianship reviewed. Given Miss Hayes's sudden and highly questionable financial windfall, and the clear signs of neglect here, we believe it is in the children's best interest to be removed from this environment immediately." It was a declaration of war. Beatrice was not just trying to smear Alara or scare her away. She was raising the stakes to their absolute limit. She was going to take his children. She was going to use her power, her money, and her complete lack of morality to rip them away from the only mother they had ever known and lock them away, burying Julian's past and her own crimes forever. Julian returned to his penthouse, the city skyline that once represented his power now feeling like the walls of a cage. He had Lila's journals, a stack of truths written in a ghost's hand, and he had the cold, hard facts from Marcus's investigation. The pieces were all there, forming a picture of such profound evil that it still seemed unreal. He knew what he had to do. He sent a single, curt message to Beatrice. "We need to talk. My apartment. Now." She arrived within the hour, dressed for battle in a sharp, crimson dress that seemed to mock the blood on her hands. She strode into his living room with an air of triumphant ownership, as if she had already won. "Julian, I am glad you have come to your senses," she began, a smug smile playing on her lips. "The custody hearing is a formality. My lawyers are the best. We will have the children in a proper home by the end of the month. We can put all this unpleasantness behind us." Julian did not say a word. He simply walked to the massive glass coffee table that sat in the center of the room. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness, he began to lay out the evidence. First, a printed satellite image of the crash site. Next to it, a copy of the mechanic's bank statement, the $50,000 deposit circled in red. Then came the flowchart Marcus had created, tracing the payment from the Sinclair-owned Shell Corporation. Finally, he opened one of Lila's journals to a specific page and laid it on top. Her elegant script was a stark contrast to the cold, typed documents around it. "I feel like I am being hunted," the entry read. "A dark car is always there, at the edge of the woods. I think they know about the baby." He looked up at her, his gray eyes no longer cloudy with confusion, but sharp and clear as shards of ice. "It was you," he said, his voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. "You did not just break us up. You had her killed." For a fraction of a second, her composure wavered. A flicker of primal fear flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a chilling, defiant arrogance. She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Killed?" she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Do not be so melodramatic, Julian. I merely solved a problem that you were too weak to handle yourself." She walked around the table, her crimson dress a slash of violence against the cool gray of the room. She looked down at the evidence not with fear, but with a kind of proprietary pride. "I did it for us," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I did it for our legacy. That girl and her bastard child would have ruined everything we have worked for, everything our families built. She was a nobody, a weed in a magnificent garden. I simply pulled her out by the root. I protected you. I protected our future." Her confession was not apologetic. It was a justification, a proud declaration of her own moral bankruptcy. She felt no guilt, no remorse. In her twisted worldview, Lila's life was a small, acceptable price to pay for the preservation of their status. She truly believed she was the hero of the story. In that moment, the last vestiges of the man Julian Vance used to be crumbled into dust. The ambition, the need for approval, the entire framework of his life built on the Vance and Sinclair names. It all seemed like a sickness. He looked at this woman, this stranger who had slept in his bed and planned their future, and he felt nothing but a profound, bottomless disgust. She was not a partner. She was a parasite. "There is no us," he said, the words feeling like a liberation. "There is no future. There is nothing." He turned from her and walked to his desk. He picked up the phone, his movements calm and deliberate. He dialed his corporate lawyer. "David," he said, his voice firm. His gaze locked on Beatrice's stunned face. "The merger with Sinclair Enterprises is off. Effective immediately. Release a statement to the press. Cite irreconcilable ethical differences in business practices." Beatrice stared at him, her mouth agape. "You would not dare," she whispered, the color draining from her face. "Our families. The contracts are signed." "Contracts can be broken," Julian said coldly. He pressed another button on his console, this one for building security. "Marcus, I need you to come to the penthouse. Please escort Miss Sinclair from the premises." She is no longer welcome in this building. He hung up the phone. He had just detonated a multi-billion-dollar deal, torpedoed 2 corporate dynasties, and declared war on one of the most powerful families in the country. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly powerful. "You will regret this, Julian," Beatrice shrieked, her mask of composure finally shattering, revealing the panicked, feral creature beneath. "I will destroy you. I will take those children, and I will make sure you never see them again." "No, you will not," Julian said, his voice flat and final. "You will not get near them." The elevator chimed, and Marcus entered, his presence large and imposing. He nodded once at Julian, then looked at Beatrice. "Miss Sinclair, this way, please." Her threats and insults echoed down the hall as Marcus firmly led her away, the sound fading until all that was left was a profound and cleansing silence. He did not waste a moment. He drove back to Willow Creek, the weight of his old life lifting with every mile he put between himself and the city. He found Alara on the porch, the twins sleeping inside. She looked up, her face etched with worry, 100 questions in her eyes. He sat on the porch step below her, not as a superior, but as a supplicant. He told her everything. He told her about Beatrice's chilling confession, about her utter lack of remorse. He told her about the canceled merger, the severed ties, the lines he had drawn in the sand. "I know I do not deserve to ask you for anything," he said, his voice heavy with the emotion he could no longer contain. "And I am not asking for your forgiveness. That is something I have to spend the rest of my life trying to earn. But I am asking you to let me fight with you." She threatened them, Alara. "She is not going to stop. This is not just about custody anymore. It is about protecting them from a monster." He looked up at her, his gaze unwavering. "I failed Lila. I failed them. I will not fail them again. Let me help you protect our family." He said the word, "our," and it hung in the air between them, fragile but real. It was a promise. It was a commitment. It was the beginning of a battle for the soul of his family, a battle he was finally ready to fight. The annual Vance Foundation Gala was the glittering centerpiece of the city's social calendar, a night where old money and new power convened to celebrate their own benevolence. For years, Julian had presided over it with a sense of detached duty. But this year it was different. It was Beatrice's last remaining bastion of power, an event she still controlled through the Foundation's board. She intended to use it as a stage for her final, most audacious performance. She would be the centerpiece, announcing a new, lavish children's charity initiative, a cynical masterpiece of public relations designed to paint her as a saint just days before the custody hearing. It was her checkmate move. But Julian saw the board for what it was, a battlefield. He arrived not through the grand front entrance, but through a side door, avoiding the press of cameras. He was not dressed in a tuxedo. He wore a simple, dark suit, a uniform for the task ahead. And he was not alone. By his side, her hand held firmly in his, was Alara Hayes. She wore a simple, elegant blue dress they had picked out together, a color that brought out the fierce light in her eyes. And holding their other hands were Leo and Lily, dressed in new clothes, their faces a mixture of awe and nervousness at the glittering spectacle around them. They were not props in his war. They were the reason he was fighting it. They walked into the grand ballroom just as Beatrice was taking the stage, a vision in white, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd at the sight of Julian with Alara and the children. It was a scandal made flesh, walking right into the heart of their pristine world. Beatrice faltered for a second, her eyes locking with Julian's across the room. She saw not the broken man she expected, but a soldier, resolute and ready. She recovered quickly, her politician's smile snapping back into place. She began her speech, her voice smooth as honey, speaking of the sacred duty to protect the innocent, to provide for the vulnerable. Julian listened, a cold fury building inside him. He waited for her to finish her platitudes, to pause for the expected round of applause. In that moment of quiet, he moved. He walked directly to the stage, taking the steps 2 at a time. He took the microphone from the stand next to her. The room fell into a shocked, absolute silence. "Thank you, Beatrice," Julian said, his voice amplified throughout the enormous hall. "Your passion for the welfare of children is truly inspiring." His words were laced with an irony so sharp it was almost a physical thing. "But I believe in transparency," he continued, turning to face the assembled titans of industry, the media, the pillars of society. "And if we are to speak of protecting children, we must speak the whole truth." He nodded to Marcus, who was standing by the tech booth. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the Vance Foundation logo, flickered to life. It showed the interior of Julian's penthouse. And then, a voice filled the room. Beatrice's voice. "I did it for us, Julian. She was a nobody, a weed in a magnificent garden. I simply pulled her out by the root." The secret recording of her confession played out for all to hear. The collective gasp was like the sucking of all oxygen from the room. The city's elite stared, mouths agape, at the woman in white on the stage, her pretty words about charity now exposed as the grotesque hypocrisy they were. Beatrice stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. The recording ended, plunging the room back into silence. "As you can hear," Julian said, his voice breaking with emotion, "Miss Sinclair's methods of pulling weeds are rather extreme. She is referring to Lila Ashton, the mother of these two beautiful children." He gestured to Leo and Lily, who were now standing with Alara at the foot of the stage. "Beatrice orchestrated her murder to protect our family's legacy." A wave of chaos erupted. Reporters were shouting, cameras flashing. But Julian held up a hand, and the sheer force of his presence commanded silence once more. "But there is one more detail," he said, his voice dropping, becoming thick with grief. "One final secret that even I did not know until yesterday." The screen behind him changed again, displaying a faded photograph of Lila, smiling, with her arm around a kind-faced, silver-haired man. What the official report never mentioned, what the people Beatrice paid off were instructed to omit, was that Lila was not alone in the car that night. She was driving her father home from a doctor's appointment. His name was Arthur Ashton. He was a retired schoolteacher. He died in the crash, too. Beatrice Sinclair did not just order the murder of the woman I loved and the mother of my children. She murdered an innocent old man as well, all to cover her tracks. This final revelation was a fatal blow. It transformed the crime from a twisted, passionate offense into a cold, calculated double homicide. In the front row, Beatrice's father, a man who radiated power and influence, looked as if he had been turned to stone, the public implication of his own company's involvement sealing his fate along with his daughter's. At that moment, as if on cue, two uniformed police officers and a plainclothes detective walked calmly onto the stage. They moved past Julian and stopped directly in front of the stunned, white-faced Beatrice. "Beatrice Sinclair," the detective said, his voice calm but firm, "you are under arrest for the murders of Lila Ashton and Arthur Ashton." The click of the handcuffs snapping onto her wrists echoed through the microphone, a sound of final, irrefutable justice. Her downfall was not a quiet affair. It was a public spectacle, a televised execution of a dynasty, happening live at her own party. She was led away, speechless and broken, through the crowd she had so desperately sought to rule. Amidst the whirlwind of flashing cameras and shouting reporters, Julian turned his back on the chaos. He walked off the stage and knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with his children. The world could have its story. He only cared about this. He saw the confusion and fear in their eyes, and his heart broke. He didn't say anything. Words were useless. He simply opened his arms. Leo and Lily hesitated for only a second before rushing into his embrace. He pulled them in tight, burying his face in their hair, breathing in their scent. Alara knelt beside them, her hand resting on his shoulder, a silent, steadying presence. The four of them were an island of stillness in a sea of pandemonium. For the cameras, it was a dramatic, sensational image that would be on the front page of every paper. For Julian, it was a moment of sacred reunion. A broken man finally, tearfully, beginning to piece himself back together, finding his wholeness not in a boardroom or a balance sheet, but in the small, trusting arms of the children he had almost lost forever. A year passed. The seasons turned at Willow Creek Farm, washing away the stain of the past with the steady, cleansing rhythm of nature. The farm was transformed. The peeling paint on the house was now a warm, welcoming yellow. The fences stood straight and strong, no longer sagging with weariness. The fields, once overgrown with weeds, were now planted with rows of vegetables and a sprawling patch of wildflowers, a riot of color that Lila would have loved. It was not a millionaire's sterile estate. It was a home, breathing and alive. Julian Vance was transformed, too. The man who had once commanded a global empire from a glass tower now found his purpose in simpler things. He wore faded jeans and worn leather boots, his hands calloused from mending fences and tilling soil. The perpetual clouds in his gray eyes had cleared, replaced by a light he had never known he possessed. He was laughing, a deep, genuine sound of joy, as he pushed Lily on a tire swing he had hung from the thick branch of an old oak tree. He had stepped down as CEO of Vance Holdings, relinquishing day-to-day control to a trusted board and retaining only his seat for major ethical decisions. His fortune, once a tool for conquest, was now an instrument of atonement. He had used the vast sums of money once earmarked for the Sinclair merger to establish the Lila and Arthur Ashton Foundation, a nonprofit that provided top-tier legal aid to single parents and guardians fighting for custody against wealthy, powerful opponents. He had turned the very symbol of his greed and moral failure into a legacy of justice and protection for people just like Alara. Alara sat on the newly repaired porch, a sketchbook open on her lap. She was no longer just the fierce guardian. She was an artist again, finding time to capture the beauty of the world around her. She watched Julian and Lily, a soft, peaceful smile on her face. Leo was nearby, meticulously tending to a small garden patch that was entirely his own, explaining the science of companion planting to a patient Julian. This was their new normal, a life built not on wealth or status, but on shared work, quiet moments, and the steady presence of family. Julian left the swing and walked over to the porch, his boots making a soft sound on the wooden planks. He sat beside Alara, their shoulders brushing. He smelled of fresh air and sunshine. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. He wasn't wearing a watch that cost more than a car. His wrist was bare save for a simple, braided leather bracelet Leo had made for him. He did not have a velvet box or a diamond ring. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring he had spent weeks carving himself from a fallen branch of a willow tree, the same kind of wood he had used for the bird he gave Lila all those years ago. He held it out to Alara in the palm of his hand. "Lila brought me back here," he said, his voice quiet, filled with a deep, humble sincerity. "But you, Alara, you are the one who taught me how to stay. You showed me what it means to fight for family, what it means to truly love someone. You saved them, and in doing so, you saved me." He looked from the ring to her eyes. "Let's build a future she would have been proud of. Together. As a family." Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but they were tears of joy. She had fought so long and so hard, sacrificing everything for the memory of her friend. She had never expected to find a love of her own in the ashes of that tragedy. She looked at this changed man, this devoted father, this gentle partner, and she saw not his past, but their future. She nodded, unable to speak, and let him slide the smooth, wooden ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, Leo and Lily abandoned their activities and ran to the porch, throwing their arms around Julian and Alara, creating a tangle of limbs and happy laughter. Julian pulled them all into a group hug, holding his family tight against him. He looked out over the land, the restored farm, the children he adored, the woman he loved. For years, he had relentlessly pursued a legacy of steel and glass, a monument to his own name. He realized now how hollow that pursuit had been. The only legacy that ever truly mattered was right here, in his arms, built not of power or ambition, but of love, soil, and the profound grace of a second chance.